We're going to be looking today at what is rather a messy week. So Fable was meant to go offline coming out of the subscription last night, but it's been given a stay of execution. We're being told it's going to be around until the 12th of July, which is fantastic news if you still have usage. We also know that ChatGPT are releasing their new model. We have final confirmation that Sol, Terra, and Luna will be publicly launched on Thursday. We also heard, good God, there's a lot going on this week, that we have a new Grok 4.5, which is coming out. So basically, it is all hands on decks. We're also going to have a new Gemini Pro model soon and the full release of DeepSeek. So we are spoiled. Whatever you are using, there's always going to be this thing in the back of your head, which is, am I using the best model? Is there something better available to me? And I'm seeing a lot of people dealing with this right now. Like, oh, should I move from Claude over to OpenAI? Should I move from OpenAI over to Claude? Should I be using DeepSeek? A lot of confusion. Now, this has always been the case in artificial intelligence because we have a new model basically every couple of weeks. But in particular, right now, it's a big question because these models are getting extremely smart. If you've been using Fable for the last couple of weeks, you know that it can just one-shot problems that previously might have held up your models, but Fable can just cut through them. Personally, when I got my Fable allowance back this morning, I've given it all the tasks that I've been working on in Codex the last few days and said, hey, can you go back and fix all of this? And it has. It is so good. But this brings up the question of what should we be using at any time? What's the best model? And this sometimes leads to paralysis. What I want to talk about today is specific to Fable, yes, but we've only got 4 days of Fable left at this point. So this is a more general point. How can we string models together? How can we connect models so that whatever we're working on, we're always able to bring in the best models? And how can we get them to work together? How can we have one as an orchestrator? How can we have one as a project manager? And then other models, other tools as the actual workers? Super important. And Claude Devs actually put out a tweet that I'm basing this on, where they were saying use Fable 5 as an advisor and then use Sonnet, I don't know why you'd use Sonnet rather than Opus, as the executor. So we're going to be talking about this, about how you can do it outside of the Anthropic ecosystem. You can do it with any model, and we're going to be stringing them all together. So how do we do this? It's very important to realize that the model is not the system. Models change all the time. We have multiple models from ChatGPT, and we have the new XAI, and I wouldn't be that surprised if we have Gemini very soon. We have an abundance of models. So always sticking to one particular provider, always sticking to one particular model isn't very helpful, especially if you stick to something like XAI and Grok, which doesn't release that often. So having brand loyalty doesn't make much sense in this world because everything moves so quickly. So instead, what we need to do is we need to build model agnostic workflows. So workflows that work with whatever the best model is at the time, slotting the different models into different places inside of our workflow for the best impact. Okay? That's what's going to be the durable skill here. It doesn't matter if it's Fable. It doesn't matter if we're talking about GPT-6 somewhere down the line, or I don't know, Opus 5 or Opus 6 one day. This is still going to be the case. This is the simple split that we're going to be starting with. And this is what Claude Devs have been talking about in this tweet, which has been doing numbers on Twitter. It's basically a very basic split between a smart model, which becomes the advisor, the planner, and then dumber models, which go and do the actual work. So a planner model, you're going to be using that for strategy, architecture, judgment, trade-off, reviews, reviewing the work of the worker bots. And for this, we'd use something like Fable. This is what Fable excels in. If you then get Fable to go and do all of the line-by-line coding or putting together the sales pages or doing all of the grunt work, you're kind of wasting Fable at that point. It's extremely good, but remember you have limited usage. And if you are going to be using it on the API, it is incredibly expensive. Just in today's newsletter, I did a bit of back the maths calculation. Back on the 14th of June, I spent 900 million tokens on Codex, so almost 1 billion tokens in one day. Back of the envelope mathematics on that would be about $15,000, £12,000 or so for one day of Fable usage. Very expensive, and I don't want to have to remortgage my house. So for this reason, don't necessarily use the most intelligent model for all tasks. It is overkill, and there's no point doing so, especially when it's on the API. It's just going to cost you an absolute fortune. Instead, what you're going to do is you're going to have supplemental models. You can have worker models, which are going to be used for the actual file edits, for running tests, implementation, cleanup, repeatable tasks, etc., etc. So what I use for that is Codex 5.5. Now, Codex is fantastic. It's a really good model for the worker model. The main thing here is not the exact model. The main thing here is that you have a smarter model and a less intelligent model, and you're going to be using the cheaper, less intelligent model to do a lot of the grunt work, whereas you have the smarter, more expensive model to do the planning and the strategy. Very, very simple, but important. So you're going to use intelligence where it matters. This is going to be for things like planning. Up front, if you are in Codex, for example, you can put it into plan mode or goal mode, and you're going to be using that for the kind of wider structure of whatever the project is. Now, if you are not a coder, this does not matter. You can use Claude Code, you can use Codex for non-coding work. For anything that is knowledge-based, these are incredibly valuable tools. But it's super important to realize it is not just for code. Right now, I am drafting a book, for example, and I've built a little project which interviews me, and it asks me questions and I answer using my microphone, and it compiles it all together like a ghostwriter. So I'm using it for a non-coding tasks. 100% you can do that. So you're going to use Fable, or whatever the top level model is when you are watching this, as your advisor to plan out and create a strategy. That advisor is then going to send those instructions to your executor models. It's going to send them to the dumber models. That allows us to get the most bang for our buck in terms of our subscription usage. If you're on a subscription, or if you're on the API, this will bring down your costs dramatically. Do not just use the best model because you have access to it. That is not a smart way to do this. How do you actually put this together from a technical point of view? You are going to have a centralized source of truth. For most of you, it's going to be something called a GitHub repo. Now, if you've never heard of GitHub, if you've never heard the word repo, don't worry too much. It is basically cloud storage. It's a bit like having a Google Drive where all of your files are sitting. These could be code, these could be documents, these could be images, doesn't really matter. They're going to be sitting in this cloud folder that you're going to then connect your tools to. The reason we don't use Google Cloud or Google Drive for this is because GitHub gives us more control over our thing. So if we're sending lots of different tasks up into this same folder, GitHub is much better able to deal with that than something like Google Drive. Because people have asked me this before, should I just use Google Drive? I wouldn't. So I've done other guides on AI brains and creating a centralized repository of everything in your life inside of a GitHub repo. But this is the same basic principle. When you're working on a project, you create a folder, and that's going to have a set of files, a set of instructions, a set of all of the work inside of that folder. And then all you're going to do, very, very simple, is connect both tools to it. So if you're working in ChatGPT, you're going to connect Codex into that folder. If you're working in Claude Code with Fable, for example, you're going to connect Claude Code to that folder. That is basically it. That's the first part, how we connect things together. If Claude is doing the planning, so Fable is doing the planning and the strategy, etc., it will basically do all of that work and then put the plan and its notes and its instructions into the folder. Then your less smart model, in this case it's going to be Codex, is going to pick up those instructions and use them to do the work. That's kind of it. It gets a lot more complicated. We could do a lot more things with it, but that is the basis of how all of this works. To make all of this work, you need the tools to have a shared set of instructions. Now, you've probably seen these things floating around if you're on Twitter, if you're on social media. People talk about artificial intelligence, things like readme.md, agents.md, claude.md, etc. MD stands for Markdown, and it is basically a text file. It's a slimmed down text file, so it's not like a Word document, which has a lot of extra formatting, stuff that you can't necessarily see, but there's a lot of craft around the text inside of a Word document. So what an MD file is basically a stripped down version. So it just has text. Very, very simple. And all you're going to have inside of your project folder is a bunch of these text files. And these text files, once you open them up, are not technical. It's not full of code. It is basically instructions that we give to our AIs. In mine, for example, mine will have, when you are writing, make sure you're writing in UK British English. Do not write in American English. So that will make sure that all of my agents write in using my spelling, British English. So very basic things. And that is just a basic text instruction inside of a text folder which sits inside of our project. That's it. So what's going to happen is your smarter model, like Fable, is going to set all of this up for you. You're going to say, I'm putting together a project. You're going to be doing the planning. I want you to scope it out. I want you to put together the project plan, create a README, agents in the Claude MD, and build this so that it is model agnostic, so that any model can read these files and work from the instructions that you provided. That's what we're doing. And we're putting all of that into our shared repository, which again is connected to Fable and it's connected to Codex and Cursor and Grok and anything else you want to connect it to. They're all going to read off this central folder, which has a set of instructions that have been prepared by our planner. In terms of connecting, so these instructions will route the work to the different models, but there's a few things that we can do inside of our tools just to make them speak to each other, to connect them up. So let's imagine we are using Claude Code and Codex. These are the big two. So there's a couple of ways you can do this. If they're both working in the same repo, you can start the work in Claude Code. It can put together the plan, and then you can go over to Codex and say, hey, look in this folder that we're working out of, and let's get to work on these tasks in this particular list. So that means you are manually going back and forward between Claude Code and Codex. That works, but the problem with that is you, the human being. It is putting the impetus on you to go back and forward, and you become a bit of a bottleneck at this point. There are plugins for both Claude Code and Codex that allow you to plug the other model in. So if you are using Claude Code as your main surface, the main thing that you're working out of, you're going to install the Codex plugin inside of Claude Code. And that's going to allow Claude Code to call upon your Codex subscription and use Codex inside of Claude Code. Or if you're using Codex, you are going to install the Claude Code plugin inside of Codex, and that again is going to allow it to call on Claude Code when it needs it for certain tasks. That's one way to do it. The other way is MCP or CA, where you are basically connecting them directly. So there's no kind of clunky software layer in between. Instead, they are connecting directly under the hood. There's nothing for you to see. To get this done, it sounds complicated, but it's not really. You're going to go into Claude Code and say, hey, we're working on this project. You're going to be doing the strategic layer. You're going to be doing the planning because you are Fable and you know what you're doing. However, Codex from ChatGPT is going to be doing the actual implementation. So you're going to pass the tasks off to Codex and Codex will implement. I want you to set up a CLI or an MCP or an API. I want you to connect to Codex. Just say, I want you to connect to Codex. That's all you have to say so that you can pass the instructions on. And it will work out how to do it itself the best way, which would probably be the CLI, the command line interface. So this is the most technical and the most kind of baseline integration because they are just talking to each other through code. But it's also kind of the easiest to set up because you just ask Claude to do it, or you just ask Codex to do it, and it will sort it out itself. Very simple. If you get stuck on anything with AI, ask the AI. Say, hey, Kyle said I need to connect you to Codex. I don't know how to do that. How do I do that? And Claude will walk you through. Very cool. So this is my personal recommended workflow. It will depend on what you're doing. So you might want to start in Codex instead of Claude Code. It's totally up to you. So what I do is I start in Fable to plan the work. So if I'm building an application, I am building an app for my students right now. I will begin that work in Fable. What I personally do is I will give it a quick brief, say this is kind of what I want to do, and then I will switch to the microphone and I will talk to Fable and say, I'll answer its questions. It will say, hey, who's this for? What kind of platforms are you thinking about putting it on? Where you're going to store your files? It will go through all of those questions and I will answer using my voice. That allows me to basically brain dump everything that's in my head that is unstructured. I just dump it in, I yap into a microphone. Fable is then smart enough to turn that into a proper project plan in a much more efficient way than if I had sat down to try and type up the project myself. It will just get on and do that. Fable will help you plan the work, or Opus 4.8, or ChatGPT Codex 5.5, 5.6 in a few days' time. Doesn't really matter. You use the smartest models for the job. That will write up the README, the agents.md, and all of the other instructions, as well as set up the project file structure. It will do all of that for you, so you don't need to worry. And you'll tell it directly, hey, by the way, a slightly less intelligent model is going to be dealing with the implementation. So I'm going to be using Codex. Codex is going to do that work for me. It could be passing from ChatGPT to Claude. I'm not giving any particular recommendations here. You get your smarter model to write the brief that the less smart model is going to follow. So for me, Claude writes that brief, it passes it to Codex, and then Codex will go ahead and do the work. Then when the work is complete, it gets bumped back up to Fable to check. And Fable will run through it, it will test it as a user, it will look for bugs, it will look for errors, it will look for security issues, and then it will relay them back to Codex for fixes. And then once we have done all of that, I can save it into Git, I can push it, I can merge it into my main project, and then move on to the next thing. So this is my personal workflow. You can adapt it depending on what models you want to be using. Cool. So the big takeaway here is don't panic about all of the new models coming out. Every time a new model comes out is great. It's good news because all of the models are getting better and better all of the time. Even XAI and the Grok model, I've never been particularly positive on the Grok models because they're not as good. Apparently, it is an Opus class model and it is a 1.5 trillion parameter model. Sizes and everything, but generally the bigger the better. So maybe we'll even have a good XAI Grok model coming as well. We have Sol coming on Thursday. We have Gemini Pro 3.5 Pro should be arriving in the next couple of weeks. And then we have the DeepSeek full release as well. So we have an abundance. We're very lucky to have all of these models. So instead of making it a problem where you don't know which one to use, the answer is really use them all. You're just going to sequence them. You're going to put them in their right places. You're going to work out how to connect them all in one place, one GitHub repository, so that you're not worried about always using one particular model and whether you're falling behind, because you can draw on different models, different tools, and have them work together in harmony. And all of this will change. This week, we're talking about Fable. We're talking about GPT 5.6. If you're watching this a year from now, it will be different models, but the same basic principles apply. Use the smarter models for planning, push the work to an implementer model, send the work back to the smarter model to check, and that is your loop. And then when you are happy, you push it to your project. It is a free webinar. It is me. It is not an AI me. I know people always ask. It's not pre-recorded. It will be me live. I will prove it by talking about Fable and ChatGPT at the beginning, ChatGPT 5.6 at the beginning. And I'm going to be talking about how you can teach artificial intelligence to business and make very good money doing so. I charge about $2,000 or $3,000 to go and teach businesses, and I have about 250 students who are charging similar rates all around the world, showing businesses how to use artificial intelligence. And you do not need a PhD. You do not need to be a computer scientist whiz. In fact, that can get in the way of you being able to communicate to normal people who really need this right now, how they can use artificial intelligence. So again, that's at aiwithkyle.com/webinar. And whilst you are there, make sure that you join the community. Make sure that you come and join the newsletter, totally free. And what happens is the stream that you're watching right now will be tidied up and turned into a YouTube video and a newsletter, which comes out on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. Awesome. Thank you so much, everybody.